let me repeat what I started with. I said that this syllabus has 3 parts to it: poetry, drama, and the novel, because the subject is called modern literary texts. And we are starting today with the poetry section. And for the poetry section, I have chosen T.S. Eliot, and I have included 2 poems, the most important or famous, most anthologized poems by T.S. Eliot. But before we go on with our analysis of the 2 poems, it's important to situate him historically. T.S. Eliot appeared in the early years of the 20th century, when there was a revolution in literature in general and poetry in particular. Indeed, he was one of the makers of that revolution in poetry. That revolution in poetry is often termed by critics as modernism, a literary movement that occupied the first 30 years of the 20th century. Modernism was a revolt against Victorianism before it, and Romanticism that preceded Victorianism. According to T.S. Eliot, these were new times, and those new times required a new poetry. So, a new poetry was required for the new times, or a new poetry had to be written to suit the new times, according to T.S. Eliot. And that kind of poetry, according to Eliot, also came to be so various, so complex, and so elusive. And in one of his famous statements, Eliot says, "Our civilization is so complex, so various, so elusive." This is how he describes, let's say, the civilization of the Western world in the time he appeared in. He says, "Our civilization is so various, so elusive, so complex," so that when that civilization plays itself upon the sensibility of the modern poet, that's to say, when that civilization comes in contact with the modern poet, so when that civilization plays itself upon the sensibility of the modern poet, the end result will be a poetry that is difficult, that is complex, that is elusive. These are qualities which characterize all modernist poetry. It's not difficult, it is not easy to understand. Just as an example, Eliot is a poet who is so fond of, or who has, let's say, initiated a whole trend in modernist poetry, the trend of allusion, or creating literary allusion. Simply defined, the word allusion means reference to a place, to a time, to people, to literature, reference to anything. This is the meaning of the word allusion. And Eliot's poetry abounds in literary allusions, or allusions in general. He makes references to literatures written in German, or Italian, or even Sanskrit in India. Something which makes the reading of his poetry an impossible task, or a difficult task for a native speaker, and an impossible task for a non-native speaker. Why? Because the text of the poem is written in English, and all of a sudden he brings in an allusion from German, for example. So we have to stop. We have to stop. Well, critics later on picked up those references and they compiled what appeared to be an illustrating dictionary. So there are certain books dedicated to a translation of the references made in all the works of the modernist poets, including Eliot himself. As an example, his poem, The Love Song of J.Alfred Prufrock. Just underneath the title, there is a quotation. There is a quotation. Well, if we read the title and leave the quotation and go on with our reading of the poem, our reading will be lacking, will not be complete. Why? Because this quotation is there for a purpose. T.S. Eliot has proved that quotation for a purpose. The general purpose of Eliot, of bringing in those allusions, is to bring in the past as a way of commenting upon the present. Although he sometimes makes a contrast between the two. So it is a technique which helps him to make a comment upon the present by way of returning to the past. What is in the quotation underneath the title? It is a quotation from the Italian poet Dante. You can check the translation of this quotation on any website. Well, it's available on many websites and many books. Well, this quotation is taken from the Italian poet Dante, specifically from his The Divine Comedy, his famous poem, The Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is a long poem in 3 books, or in 3 parts. Paradise, Hell, and the Purgatory. These are the titles of the Divine Comedy. So the second part is devoted to a journey that Dante makes through the hell, or through hell. Well, he imagines, or he divides the hell into 9 circles. In the ninth circle of hell, Dante meets a man, or one of the sinners, by the name of Montalverto. Well, this sinner makes confessions. He confesses something to Dante. Why? Realizing that no one ever returns from the kingdom of the dead. So he opens his heart and he confesses something to Dante. Because, as I said, realizing that no one ever returns from the dead. This is what's happening in the quotation. What is in this quotation that Eliot keeps his eye on? Or what is in this quotation that he wants to be relevant to what he writes about this character, J.Alfred Prufrock? 2 things. Number 1, the idea of confession. Number 2, the idea that the world, or the modern world in which this Prufrock lives, is some sort of a hell. Some sort of a hell. Okay. So according to this quotation, we will follow this Prufrock as he confesses something about himself. And as he moves through the modern city, which in the end may be some sort of a hell that he is living in. So this is to begin with the allusion underneath the title. This is one. The title itself, The Love Song of J.Alfred Prufrock. I usually teach first year students that it is important to stop and think about the titles of literary works, because they are the keys that will open up to us the wider universe of the work. The love song, we expect someone to make a song about his love. Simple enough. So this is supposed to be a song of love of this J.Alfred Prufrock, of this man. But once we get to the end of the poem, we discover that the title itself is ironic. And this takes us to an important feature of all modernist literature, not all modernist poetry, all modernist literature, the use of irony. And as you know, irony is the contrast between what appears to be and what really is. Okay? So, irony is an important aesthetic feature of all modernist literature, not only poetry. Why do we discover that the title is ironic? Because at the end of the poem, we discover that this is not a love song at all. We discover that this character is not heroic at all. But we discover his own failure to make such a love song. So he does not make it. Therefore the title becomes ironic, because it does not express truly or the true conditions of this speaker. What is the scenario in the poem? The scenario of this man in the poem. The scenario of this poem goes like this. A man in the Middle Ages, in his middle age, is preparing himself to make a journey through the streets of the modern city of London, of course, through the streets of the modern city, to reach a fashionable restaurant where there is a group of women, among whom there is a particular woman he is supposed to propose to her, to ask her hand for marriage. Simple enough. An act, a very ordinary act. An act that is occurring thousands of times every day. We discover at the end of the poem that this man never made the journey through the streets of the city, and that what we have been following from the beginning of the poem until the end is just what we can call an interior monologue. An interior monologue. And this takes us to the first line of the poem, where we find two pronouns. Let's go, you and I. You and I. I is a reference to the speaker. Who is the you? Well, this gives us the impression that there is another person to whom he is speaking. Well, critics present or offer two views concerning the character of the addressed, the person who is addressed. Well, some say that he may be a friend of his friend. Some else say that he is speaking to himself. And this is what appears to be true. He seems to be speaking to himself. So let's go, you and I. The form that the poem takes is called an interior monologue, as I said, which is some sort of a modification of the dramatic monologue developed and perfected by the Victorian poet Robert Browning. Robert Browning perfected the dramatic monologue as an important poetic form. In a dramatic monologue, we expected to find three things: a speaker, a listener or an implied listener who is there most of the time but who doesn't speak, and a basic situation in which the speaker is caught in. In this basic situation, the speaker is caught in a process of self-revelation and self-justification. So he is caught as he is revealing something about himself, and in the meantime justifying what he is talking about. Eliot, under the influence of Browning, picked up the idea of the dramatic monologue and made some modification to it by dropping altogether the character of the implied listener, so that in the end we have what I called an interior monologue, a monologue which reveals the interior of this Prufrock. Let's go, you and I. Let us do the journey. Let us go to our intended journey through the streets of the city of London. Okay, let us follow this man as he is making the journey through the streets of London. Or let's follow his interior monologue. Go to the text of the poem in the pamphlet you have. Let us go, you and I. When the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table, let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Well, at the beginning of the poem, there is an image. There is an image. kind of a kind of image that has been developed by the metaphysical poets of the 17th century. And one of the influences upon the poetry of T.S. Eliot were the metaphysical poets. They deeply influenced the poetry of T.S. Eliot. And it is here that their influence becomes apparent. So line number 2 and line number 3. Let us go, you and I. Okay. What is the kind of atmosphere that he intends to make the journey against or in? When the evening spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. In a metaphysical conceit, the two objects compared to each other may appear to be on the surface, may appear to be incomparable. What are the two objects compared to each other here? Evening and patient. In which case the patient is in? Etherized upon a table. You know the meaning of the word etherized? Etherized. Itbannik. A person is usually etherized if he is to be operated upon, if he is ready for an operation. Evening and a patient etherized in any image or in any comparison, we usually look for a point of similarity. What could be the similarity between that evening and the patient etherized upon a table? As I said, the metaphysical conceit is some sort of an extended metaphor. Which was different from any simple image used by English poets before them. Outside, or let's make some digression. When the poet Robert Burns, in his famous poem, gives us this simple image. He says, "My love is like a red rose." By his love he means the woman he loves. The woman he loves. Simple and can be easily understood. This image is simple and can be easily understood. A woman is compared to a rose, and until nowadays, until today, we compare a woman to a red rose. Okay? But when the metaphysical poet Andrew Marvell makes a comparison between a dewdrop and the human soul, the image becomes difficult to understand. A dewdrop and a human soul. Two things which appear to be far, to be distant from each other, therefore cannot be compared to each other. But after some thinking, we discover the point of similarity between a dewdrop and a human soul. A dewdrop falls from heaven early in the morning, and when the sun rises, it evaporates and gets back to heaven. At the moment of birth, the human soul descends, or the soul descends to humans at birth. And the moment of death, that soul rises up again to Lord. It is some sort of an image which invites the reader to give much thinking to. نرجع للقصيدة. A patient etherized upon a table. This is a metaphysical conceit in which the evening is described in terms of a patient that is lying on a table ready for an operation. Well, a patient etherized is usually conscious, but he is conscious of nothing. He is not dead. He is not dead, he is conscious, but conscious of nothing. Okay? So we can say that he is in a state of paralysis. State of paralysis. So this is the kind of atmosphere against which this Prufrock will be moving. We will discover that he is indeed in a state of paralysis, that he will be indecisive, that he will be hesitant, that he will be coward, unable to make a decision. So he is like that patient who is lying etherized upon a table. He is conscious, but conscious of nothing. Or that's to say, this metaphysical conceit is suggestive of the state of paralysis that this Prufrock is in. Okay? So, this is how we meet him at the beginning of the poem. What kind of a city that he will be moving through? Well, one of the most important characteristic of modernist poetry is that it is a poetry of the cityscape. We usually describe romantic poetry as poetry of the landscape. The mountains, the hills, the lakes, the sky. This is what we call landscape. Okay? But the modernist poetry is a poetry of the landscape, of the cityscape. And the city plays a very important role in modernist poetry. Okay? Under the influence of the modernist poets, the Egyptian poet Reda Abdul-Hai had written or produced a collection of poems called Medina Bila Qalb. A modernist poet like them. Because modernism was a movement that spread all over the world. So anyway, so the city plays a very important role in modernist poetry. So what kind of a city that this man is moving through? Well, if we go down, we will stop at three specific aspects of that city. Number one, half deserted streets. Number two, one-night cheap hotels. Number three, sawdust restaurant with oyster shells. So these are three aspects of that city. These are three aspects of that city. Its streets are half empty. It has one-night cheap hotels. It has restaurants covered with sawdust and overs oyster shells. In one word, this atmosphere is a sordid one, dirty one. So the city with all its sordidness, with all its dirt, is the atmosphere against which this Prufrock will be moving. To lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let's go and make our visit. An overwhelming question. So he is planning to make that trip because he has an overwhelming question. Under the influence of the simplest poets, modernist poetry is very rich because of its many allusions and references and the many influences. Under the influence of the French simplest poets, Eliot has learned two things. Number one, the use of grand language to describe a very ordinary or even trivial things. Okay? Number two, the creation of this Prufrock himself. A man who becomes at the end a prototype of man in the modern necessity. It seems to be, as we are going to discover at the end of the poem, middle-aged, overeducated, neurotic, what else? And the other qualities that we are going to discover about him. So the creation of the character of Prufrock as a representative of man in the modern necessity, or a prototype. Number two, the use of grand language in describing what appears to be very ordinary or even trivial thing. Okay, as I told you, this man intends to propose to a woman. A very simple thing, a very ordinary thing. But look at how he describes it, an overwhelming question. Something of a magnitude. Something that's very big, that's very large. Overwhelming question. And he even escapes from answering the question. Don't ask, what is it? Because he knows inside himself that he is such a coward person who describes very ordinary things as things beyond his reach. An overwhelming question. Okay? And the section ends with the refrain, in the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Well, this is a refrain. A refrain is usually 2 lines of poetry that is repeated somewhere else in the poem, and it will be repeated in section number 3. An important piece of the structure of the poem is the use of the refrain. This refrain tells us about the kind of society that this or these women live in. Well, in the room, they come and go, they are moving constantly, talking about what? About the famous Italian artist Michelangelo. Well, if you are in the street and you started to talk about Shakespeare, people would say, oh, he is a cultured person. Okay? So talking about Michelangelo may be a symptom or a sign of culture. So it does appear that those women are cultured. But indeed, as we are going to discover throughout the poem, they are not cultured, but they pretend to be cultured. And it is in this refrain that Eliot criticizes the hypocrisy of modern society. A society which pretends to be what it is not. Pretends to be what it is not. Okay? The second section. It's night time. It's evening time. Therefore, there is yellow fog. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes. The yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and in seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. I'd like you to observe certain verbs here. In line number 1, that rubs its back. Frog. Fog, the bar. It has a back, and it rubs its back. Okay? Rubs its back. Line number 3, licked its tongue. Line number 4, let fall. Line number 5 or 6, slipped by the terrace, and then made a sudden leap. And in the last line, curled once. and they fell asleep. These are verbs that are usually used to describe a cat or the movement of a cat. Licked its tongue, curled, and then fell asleep. So it is what we call a feline image, F-E-L-I-N-E, feline related to a cat. Yeah. A feline image which gives us more and more about the atmosphere against which this man moves. It is consistent with what appears to be a state of paralysis in the first section of the poem. If you are paralyzed, you will be slow in movement. You will be slow in movement. So this feline image, or this image of the fog that overwhelms the city is described in terms of a cat. And the image, this feline image in the second section is consistent, as I said, with the image of the etherized patient in the first section of the poem. And indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and the time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and the time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of toast and tea in the room. The women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. There will be time. He says to himself, I shouldn't be in a hurry. There will be time. It's here that we discover his hesitation. He is hesitant to make the trip. So he says to himself, there will be time. I shouldn't be in a hurry. Time for everything, to make decisions and to reverse those decisions. Time to do everything, so we don't have to be in a hurry, as he says here. Indeed, there are many references here to certain works outside poem. Well, first of all, to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. He is going to meet those women, so he is preparing a face. Again, the hypocrisy of modern society. He is going to wear a mask, a social mask. He is going to prepare a face. He will not go with his real face, but he is going to prepare a social mask, to put on a social mask, so that he can meet this woman. It is again the idea of hypocrisy of modern society. What are the references in this section? And the time for all the works and the days of hands that lift and drop a question in your plate. In these two lines there are two references. In the first line there is a reference to a poem written by the Greek poet Hesiod in the 5th century. It's called Farming Year. A poem which describes the physical activities of the farmers while they are making harvest, while they are harvesting their crops. So it is the idea of physical labor or physical action. So the reference to this poem is made to create a contrast between the physical activity of those farmers and the lack of that physical activity on part of Prufrock. Is some sort of a paralyzed person. So he is not able to be physically active like those farmers. Line number 2, to lift and drop a question in your plate. He spoke previously about the overwhelming question. Now he is repeating it again. And he says that he is going to drop that question on a plate and present it to the lady to whom he is supposed to propose. So he is going to drop the question on her plate. Indeed, the verb drop and the noun plate brings to our minds the famous story of the beautiful woman Salome, a beautiful woman who lived a long time ago in the what had been known as Jewish kingdom. A Jewish king by the name of Herod was attracted to her. She refused his attractions, but after some insistence, she agreed to respond to his attractions, provided that on one condition, which was to bring her in a plate the head of the Jewish prophet John the Baptist, who refused her attractions. John the Baptist is called in Arabic Yohanna al-Mu'ammadan. He was a Jewish prophet, and she tried to seduce him, and he rejected her seduction. So the Jewish king agreed and indeed cut his head and brought it to her on a plate. An action of magnitude, great action. If we compare that action with the action that this Prufrock is going to do, drop a question on your plate. He is telling himself that he is going to do something great, something of a magnitude. Therefore, he is going to drop the question on her plate. Okay? It's again the use of grand language to describe what appears to be a very ordinary or even trivial thing. Indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I dare, and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin. My necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. I'd like to draw your attention to, do I dare disturb the universe? Disturb the universe, by the universe here he means the social circle that he is about to enter. The social circle which includes those women. Okay? So he says to himself, do I have the courage to enter the social circle of those ladies, of this woman? He is afraid. Why? Because in line number 5, they will say, how his hair is growing thin. And in line number 7, they will say, how his arms and legs are thin. If we put these two lines with a bald spot in the middle of my hair, he is aware that he is growing old. Therefore, there is a bald spot in the middle of his hair. But he is afraid of the response of the women. Why? because they will reveal his inadequacies. Or what appears to be his defects. They will speak about his hair that's growing thin. They may speak about his arms and legs that are thin. So these women may reveal his inadequacies. So he is afraid that he is growing old, and he is afraid to enter the social circle of those women who may criticize his defects, or who may reveal his inadequacies. He gives us the reason of his fear. I have known them all already, known them all. So it seems that he has known them for a long time, since a long time. Have known the evenings, mornings, and afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. One of the lines by which T.S. Eliot is remembered: I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. He has been to the place thousands of times. He has drunk thousands of coffee with those women. So he knows them quite well, to the degree that he can measure his life in terms of the number of the cups of coffee he has drunk. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voice is dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes, already known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? I'd like you to look at the last line. When I am pinned and wriggling on the wall. Wriggling on the wall. And I'd like also to look or to underline, to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways. Butt ends. We usually speak about cigarette ends. Cigarette ends. Those who smoke knows that cigarette ends mean that the cigarette they are smoking is about to finish, or at the end, in the final stage. So this is what this man is left with in this time in his life. He is left with the butt ends of his ways and life. Therefore he is afraid, because he knows those women quite well. They may reveal his inadequacies, and besides, they may exercise upon him an X-ray examination, according to the line I asked you to underline. When I am pinned and wriggling on the wall. Pinned and wriggling, these two terms are used in a lab when an examiner picks up a sample, puts it under the microscope, he pins it. He pins it. So this is what we can call an X-ray technique, or an X-ray examination that these women may perform upon him. They may speak about his deficiency, about his hair that's growing thin, about his arms that are growing thin, about how he is becoming old, about the butt ends of his life, or his ways and days, as he says. Again, we are moving with this interior monologue from point to another. And I have known the arms already, known them all. Arms that are perslated and white and bare, but in the lamplight down with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl, and how should I then presume? How should I begin? Shall I say I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows? I should have been a pair of ragged clothes scuttling across the doors of silent seas. It is here with this line that we discover that this man is afraid to death of meeting this woman. So much so that he wishes he were a sea animal, a pair of rugged clothes. He wishes he were a sea animal. The difference between a sea animal and a human being is the question of consciousness, being conscious, being aware. So he wants to escape his consciousness so that he cannot be subject to, let's say, the pinning of those women. And the afternoon, the evening sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it may linger. Look at how he speaks about the evening. It sleeps peacefully. Again, it's the image of the cat comes up again. The evening sleeps peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, or it malingers. Stretched on the floor here beside you and me, should I, after tea and the cakes and the ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed. I'd like you to pay attention to this line. I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed. Usually before a human being, any human being, comes to perform something of magnitude, he prays, he fasts, he weeps. But he fasted, he prayed and wept. For what? No. He prepared himself with these rituals because he is going to make an overwhelming question. Again, it's exaggeration. It is the use of grand language to describe something that's very ordinary or trivial. Wept for what? Prayed for what? Cried for what? Yeah, for the overwhelming question he is going to drop on the plate of the lady. Though I have seen my head grow slightly bald, brought it upon a platter, I am no prophet, and there is no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat. Eternal footman means death. Eternal footman, and I have seen death hold my coat and snicker, and in short, I was afraid. He is afraid because he is growing old, and he is afraid because of the response of the women. And would it have been worth it after all, after the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have beaten over of the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a bowl, to have squeezed the universe into a bowl, to change the whole universe, to squeeze it into a bowl, something of a great magnitude, of a huge magnitude, to relate towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. If one settling a pillow by her head should say, that's not what I meant at all, that's not it at all. So after all these preparations that he is speaking about, he may come and be surprised by the response of the woman. What would she say to him? Oh, that's not what I meant at all. You misunderstood me. You misunderstood my intention. It is repeated again in the second section of the poem, in line 2, 4, 5. Line number 8. Would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, this is not it at all, that's not what I meant at all. So this is the response he is afraid to face when he reaches that salon. We continue with that interior monologue with a reference to Hamlet in the next section. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Ironically, he is like Hamlet. It's true that he is not like Hamlet. He is not a first-rate person like Hamlet. He is a second-rate person. But he is indecisive as Hamlet. He is as hesitant as Hamlet. He is as coward as Hamlet. Although Hamlet at the end acted. All of us should know the story of Hamlet. Most of the time he talked. He saw how his uncle killed his father and married his mother and they captured the throne. So most of the time he talked. Okay? So coward, hesitant, indecisive. At the end he acted. He says, I am not Prince Hamlet. Indeed, he is not a first-rate person like Hamlet. He is a second-rate person. But ironically, he is like Hamlet, indecisive, coward, and hesitant like Hamlet. Okay? Well, some critics explain this reference to Hamlet by saying that Eliot, in this stage of his poetic career, because this is one of the early poems that he had written, in that early stage of his poetic career, he could be able to create a second-rank person, like Prufrock. He may go on in the future and create a first-rank or a first-rate person like Hamlet. If at that stage of his life he may appear to not to be a first-rate writer, in the future he may be a first-rate writer like Shakespeare himself. Well, this is some explanation offered by some critics explaining the reference to Hamlet. I grow old, I shall wear the bottom of my trouser rolled. I have grown old. I have grown old. He is making excuses to himself. Remember that in a dramatic monologue, the speaker is caught at a moment where he is making revelations about himself and making, in the meantime, justifications. So at this moment, he is making justification. I have grown old. So I may not be up to asking the hand of this woman. I have grown old. So he is making excuses, or he is making self-justification, as I said. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? A peach. We all know that a peach is a fruit. One critic has given a very interesting explanation of the use of peach. He says that the peach in Chinese culture is a symbol of the female genitalia. So it is used here to refer to the sexual inadequacy of this Prufrock. Shall I be able to eat the peach? Shall I be able to make a sexual intercourse with that woman? I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. Well, he ends the poem with this romantic song sung by the mermaids. Mermaids, sea creatures, or a mermaid, hurriya. So the poem ends with this romantic song by the mermaids, but it's not for him at all. I do not think they will sing to me. I have seen them riding seaward on the waters, combing the white hair of the waves blown back. When the wind blows the water white and black, we have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. The poem ends by what appears to be a part of a sonnet. A part of a sonnet. And this takes us to an important technique that Eliot depends upon for the creation of his poems, which is the technique of fragmentation. Fragmentation means fragmentation, cutting into pieces. So he looks at culture, a general outlook. He situates the culture of England against the culture of Europe, against the culture of the world. Out of the vast array of culture, he goes to bits and pieces and he brings it in his poems to make something new out of them. So in this poem, this is a part of a sonnet. At the beginning there was a refrain. At some part of the poem appears to be written in a free verse. At the end, there is a sonnet. In the middle, there is a refrain. All these are pieces that go into the making up of the structure of the whole poem. And this is a technique that he repeats in almost all his poems.
Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons.